Right, so finally, welcome to
Mhm.
my round one and round three recap of the Cambridgeshire County Championship. Um, we've had some technical difficulties trying to record this video, but we're finally over them, I think. And Praveen, have you had a chance to have a look over these games?
Yes, I definitely have, and it's quite interesting that they both are Caro-Kanns. They both have very specific ideas in the games. I think we will have quite a few things to talk about, right from the opening choice of the variation that you played, and some of the highlights that we will see, right from the first one to the follow-up game. So quite excited.
Yeah, so this first one is round one. He was a strong player. 1966 his rating was, so in with a tough game
Mhm.
straight away, but that's good. And yeah, I'll let you just play through the moves and ask away.
Sounds good. So let's take a look at the first game then. I think I have control over this board, so I'm just going to start moving the pieces and see how this goes along while we talk through it. Okay, so it's e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3. We have pawn takes, and so far I think we're just in book because uh, that's pretty much the only choice for black over here to take on e4, since everything else leads to either a space disadvantage for black or probably some tactical issues in the center if black just ignores this capture over here. So we have pawn takes pawn, we have knight takes, and then the next move is probably where I would start my first point of analysis with you. So I see that you played knight f6 instead of the more common move, which is bishop f5, which leads to the classical approach in the Caro-Kann, with a completely fresh set of ideas as compared to what happened in the game that you played. So if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the Tartakova variation for black. And what makes you want to play this line, if I may ask?
So basically, just from a YouTube video, I when I first started playing these new repertoire, like the Lopez and the Caro-Kann, I basically found
Mhm.
someone on YouTube called Chess Geek. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he
Well, I
does.
am familiar with it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually have heard of it.
I really like his YouTube videos. He basically just does opening playlists. So he has like a Lopez playlist, a Caro-Kann playlist, and yeah, this was his recommendation. So his idea is that after
Mhm.
takes, um, the plan is you go bishop d6 castles, rook e1. You reroute this knight
Mhm.
from d7 to f8 to g6, um,
Mhm.
and um, you develop this bishop to pin the knight if they go to f3, and then if they go h3, you drop back and you use this h3 pawn, that weakness, for a sacrifice. And then once you've got the knight, and once you've got all the pieces in place, like I just said, this knight on
Mhm.
g6 and the bishop on d6. The queen, I think, needs to be on d7 so that when you sack, you retake with the queen. Yeah, you basically just
Mhm.
get a big attack, which obviously I like the look of. Not that any good players are going to walk into that, so it's probably probably a waste of time anyway.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. I think that there's a good side to it, given the openness of the position. The only problem I have with this line, which is probably more of a personal uh, thought than the actual reality of how good or bad it is um, I sense black has double pawns, which make it slightly more challenging to play for a pawn break in the center. And just to illustrate some thought behind that, let's play a couple of moves over here. Knight f3, bishop d6. Let's just say white decides to play an early h3, black castles. White plays bishop d. Oh, probably let's go bishop e2 in this example, since rook e8 doesn't come with check. Um, Let's go bishop f5 since after castles, let's go bishop f5 since I can't pin the knight. My problem is even though this file is open and after white plays something like c3, to me it's not so clear how does black really strive for any specific advantage over here. Just because the only pawn break that I see possible is c5, but if an exchange goes through over there, it seems like a dead equal position where both sides have almost the same set of pieces doing the exact same things. Um, positions like this, if both sides play correctly, tend to be a draw. And if white is very specifically interested in an endgame, then in some very specific cases, your double pawns may prove to be a slight issue towards the endgame, which is a fearful factor for me. Something that I don't want to see myself entering into an endgame with, if I'm not fast enough to create opportunities in the middle game. So what I personally prefer, instead of giving myself the double pawn scenario with this knight f6 move, is to simply play bishop f5. White usually plays knight to g3, the bishop drops back. Over here, there are a couple of choices for white, but I believe the most common one is h4, trying to simply
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
secure the bishop. And then I think black plays h6.
h6. That's right. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, white can grab the space anyway. Bishop drops back, knight develops. Black plays knight e7 just to keep an eye on the e5 square. Sorry, bishop d3. At this point, black doesn't want to lose the right to castle, so he exchanges. White takes. Knight comes out to f6. It's a bit boring, but this is exactly how it typically goes if the main line is entered, where both sides have a very specific approach to it. But again, the most important thing for me is that after continuing to evolve and develop all my pieces, I have two sets of pawn islands with no weaknesses present on them. And now I find c5 a lot more of a playable idea, especially after I've castled and put my queen on a5, because I now sense that there's some sort of activity from the plans involving rook to c8, and possibly even just looking to utilize my b and a pawn in some specific ways, depending, of course, on what white does. But again, the most important thing for me is that my two sets of pawn islands are very healthy, and they're very stable. And even though white has this huge space advantage from the looks of it, black's got a very strong position that is almost unbreakable. And I get to see a lot of insightful play coming from this sort of setup from black's point of view. So, in terms of the variation that you chose, I'm gonna just go ahead and say that I'm sure it's 100% playable. I've seen games where knight f6, the Tartakova variation, has been quite played in this line. But as somebody who has uh, dabbled in with the Caro-Kann here and there, I found more comfort with bishop f5. Uh, but yeah, I think we should probably just go ahead and then see how did this whole game turn out after knight f6 was played. And the funny thing is, I don't, if I remember this correctly, I don't think he ended up taking your knight anyway. I think yeah, that's right. He never took your knight. He just simply dropped his knight back to g3. We would have definitely have expected him to take and try to justify some advantage by giving you double pawns.
Yeah. No. To be fair,
Mm.
I have actually struggled lately in the in that task cow variation. So I think I'll take your advice and go for the main line going forward.
Well, absolutely. I think it'll be good to, in the future, probably just review one game where you play with the classical line and see how does that compare to a game like this that we're looking at right now, and just assess whether you find better comfort into the middle and end game positions that you get out of it. But like I said, I mean, this guy decides to just go back to G3, so it's probably almost a transposition of the main line, except you don't have the privilege of playing bishop f5 right now. So let's see what happens next then. You continued with h5, just going for the space on the king side. I think that's something that I'm not very familiar with in terms of theory, but from an intuitive standpoint, it looks pretty fine to me. It looks like there's a rationale behind it, and he needs to be concerned about, obviously, the space grab. He responds with h4, and now you played bishop to g4. So my thought process over here is that this is probably a nice inducing kind of idea. You're asking him to make a weakness by playing f3, which then leaves this knight unprotected. And a lot of times, less experienced players might think that they're gaining a tempo by playing f3, not really paying attention to a long term or a mid-term weakness that gets created out of it. So I do appreciate bishop g4 because it's a bit deep in terms of probably what you assessed can be established, even though it seems like you're going to have to move the bishop twice. And he decides to play bishop e2. Obviously, I think he understood that f3 is just creating a problem. You responded with now queen to c7. There's no need to trade because if he decides to take your bishop, you just make an improvement, and that should be pretty helpful for black anyway. We have bishop to g4 now, bishop to g5, I'm sorry, threatening to take and maybe double your pawns. You connected your knights, that's pretty logical. He goes queen to d2, preparing to long castle. You played e6, and then he now decided to take all of a sudden. That kind of surprised me a bit. I did not expect him to suddenly take, but if I may ask, what do you think his idea behind this was? Because it seemed like he was getting ready to castle, and then it seems like he suddenly had a change of heart here and decided to take. So, do you have
Yeah.
any probable
No,
reason to believe
I
why
was
he did that?
surprised. I think I was surprised when he took at the time as well. Yeah, I don't know why he decided to trade off then, but he must have had a reason.
Yeah. So I tried my best to understand what his reason was, but what I think I understood out of this move is that it actually led to something later on in this game that you had as a possible tactic, which we're going to see in just a moment or two from here that you may have missed, but that could have been the turning point in this game. Of course, knight takes bishop is absolutely correct, and then he played knight f3, and after knight f3 you continued with knight f6. This makes sense because you're bringing in reinforcements. You're also keeping an eye on the d5 and the e4 square while protecting your knight, and the knights are connected as well. So you're not really afraid of bishop takes knight at all. In fact, I don't think he'd want to throw his bishop pair away right now. And at this point, he played the move queen e2. I guess queen e2. Maybe this might be a critical point in the game that might be worth talking about because when I first looked at this game and when I saw Queen E2 and I saw that you have excellently placed knights, especially now that you're targeting the F2 pawn, his king is not castled, your queen is eyeing the G3 knight. This might be one of the major points to talk about in the game because um, I should probably ask you if you spotted a tactic here. I do think that you may have missed something. I see that you played bishop e2, this is bishop e7. But would you like to try and see what you possibly missed as an idea for black over here?
I remember during the game. At this point, I can remember wondering what this move did, and my thinking was that he wanted to maybe bring his knight to this square, and he just wanted to give some support to e4. Um,
Mhm.
and then I remember looking at knight takes f2. Um,
That's right. Hmm.
but yeah, I couldn't. So I must have had some sort of intuition because I remember looking at it, but I didn't think it worked. I didn't think, and I can't remember why. Was it just knight takes? I think I remember looking at knight takes, king takes, knight takes, check, and then grabbing this knight.
Hmm.
But then I ruled it out just because I thought, well, if I take, he just takes with the queen, and
Yeah.
then I don't, then it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I guess the queen takes response is a bit trickier to assess since it seems like White's got everything sorted out. Um, this is a very typical puzzle that you get when you do puzzle rushes or you're just regularly solving tactics. One of the most common motifs of puzzles is the attacking the f2 and the f7 pawn, and generally it's hard to necessarily calculate stuff like this on the spot if you're not used to it. But I would put this under the category of pure pattern recognition, and you got one pattern right. You already pointed out that you saw that if knight takes, if king takes, you clearly see check. The king has to disconnect from the protection of the knight. The king moves away. It doesn't matter whether he goes to f1 or e1 because your follow-up pretty much is queen takes knight with just a pretty overwhelming position in terms of dominance against black's position, white's position right now. But like you said, the problem is there seems to be a mental block to queen takes because when you see the move knight to g4, it isn't necessarily a check that was the case with the previous idea. And just because it isn't check, our brain tends to stop calculating the fact that after knight g4, you're still getting the knight. It just doesn't strike a chord to the same degree as it did when it was
Yeah.
king takes in the previous position. So, um, um, the best advice I have is to just try to push yourself to uh, properly look at the various responses at least three moves deep, because you saw it deep enough when you assessed king takes. Let's calculate. Knight takes, king takes, knight check, king goes back, queen takes knight. That's three moves. That's exactly three moves into the thought process behind that calculation. If you did the same thing with queen takes, you would have pretty much figured out that the same logic applies in terms of figuring out why you still get the advantage after the queen moves away. The problem is, I think you stopped your calculation with just a single
Yeah, I did.
uh,
I can
move.
see it clear as
Where
day now. It's obvious, but yeah, I stopped my calculator.
Mhm,
That is one of my that is one of my big weaknesses. I stopped my calculation way too early. But I think it's quite a common issue with people my level is that they don't. I see quite a lot of people say it. Andros Toff always says it on his YouTube
mhm.
videos, and I'm currently reading Judith Polgar book, and she says it as well. She says that people my level they stop calculating like one, sometimes even just one move too early, and
Mhm.
I
And the
need to
reason
get
that
in that
also
habit.
happens, yeah, I think it's a very common problem, but one of the probable reasons why that happens is because there's a bit of a mental bias to the specific way a position looks in terms of what the reality is. So
Mm.
the reality was different when his king was out, just because the move came with check. But in this case, since the move didn't come with check, you weren't able to proceed to consider it. It seemed like as if, okay, I just lost a piece and there's no check on the king. So it didn't strike that there's a deflection tactic that exists if you just pushed yourself to look at it anyway. And I guess, a lot of these things come through more with experiences than actually just trying to improve your calculation ability. The fact that we're reviewing this game right now, we're looking at this key moment, and now you recognize that something like this actually happened. You will automatically be more alert in specific instances like this for the future, especially if you get the same line, which is quite possible in the Caro-Kann.
Mhm.
But that being said, move number 12, I think this was one of the key instances in the game where knight takes f2 was missed. And what you responded with was bishop e7, which is just going to be considered a solid move, developing, protecting your knight, getting pieces out. Of course, now white gets to survive, he gets to breathe. And the idea doesn't work anymore because this time, after queen takes, after knight to g4, the queen can still drop back to e1 and keep the knight safe. So the compensation here is simply not good enough for black. And of course, his king is simply very safe as well. Of course, you didn't play that move, but if you saw it then, it would have been a problem. My next problem, speaking of which, is the next thought of idea that you went in with. So he castled queenside, and you felt obligated that now you need to attack the queenside, and to that you decided to push b5. This move is probably one of the other major problems indicated in this game because, in general, especially given the way the position looks right now, the center is completely open. And if the center is completely open, pawn storms like this, they very seldom work unless the opponent is very inexperienced. So a move like b5 is more than creating a long-term plan towards his queen side, is creating more short-term problems in black's position in the center, namely owing to your weakness on c6 and some specific squares that he could try to utilize to his advantage. And I'm guessing I should probably ask you this, but was b5 played with the intent of a pawn storm on the queen side because he castled?
50% of it, yeah. So because he castled long, 50% of the reason I played this was to start pawn storming, but the other
Mhm,
50% was to plant this knight here, and then he can't ever kick it because obviously I'm covering this
mhm.
square. So it was kind of a
Yeah.
combination of doing this and this.
Yeah, I see the idea behind what you said. Again, my only problem with that is those kind of ideas make more sense if the center is locked.
Yeah.
And because it isn't locked, he's just got so much of alternative opportunities that will be in line with targeting your C6 pawn and whatnot. And this game, as it continues, will reflect a clear example of that. Because after B5, he started off with rook to E1. You now planted your knight just like you wanted.
Mm.
He now immediately brought his knight down to the square E5. I guess the idea of this move was to allow you to exchange, take, and open up this rook file, to which then he might not be too afraid to play c4 anyway, just to bring his queen into the game. And even though your knight may be untouchable by a pawn from his side, the attack against your c6 pawn with your with your king in the center, I guess that's his would likely be his logic to have played what he ended up playing in this game. You exchanged the bishops. You now took his knight, so you're trying to simplify a bit over here. He
Trying to
played pawn
simplify and
takes.
just give him some pawn, pawn weaknesses like double pawns, and then I think my idea
Yeah.
was to just start ramming that up the board.
Maybe, yeah, maybe push and try to make a pawn break on h3. Something could possibly come out of it. But again, it seems to me like he's got a strong grip on some of your dark squares now, and his objective would be to try to plot the knight on the d6 square specifically. The funny thing is, I think he probably rushed this idea. While that should be his goal, and while he should be striving to play for that idea, the very next move that he played after you played h4 is he moved his knight into e4 right away. And I think that that was probably another pitfall in this game, um, which also turned out to be the major turning point in terms of what went down as a disadvantage for you. Because when he played knight e4, you just castled and allowed his knight in with check. And I guess this kind of this kind of is the point where things started to go quite south for black. You moved your king, he moved his king, you tried to reconfigure the position of your queen, but then came in this move c4, which is what I anticipated for quite some time. So let's back up and let's come back to the point where he played knight e4. What I think he should have probably played is go back to f1 and try to slowly prepare c4 and probably even consider some reroute of his knight from here to here to here. I think this probably would have been a more logical way to engage, still keeping the eye of c4 in place. Um, why did you not take the pawn on e5 is my major question here, because that's what I thought black should have played.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't see anything wrong with this. I mean, it was obviously trying to get in here, and that I just think at the time I just figured, doesn't that just lose a queen?
So
Um,
if this we can assess this calculation just like the previous move number 12 situation where you had knight takes f2. Um, what you see likely is an issue is an illusion of that. It doesn't really work. Queen takes pawn. We know why this doesn't. This is a pretty obvious sight. You're just moving your queen. But I guess the problem here was you thought that the pawn is protecting, so you cannot move your queen back. But what you
yeah,
probably discounted is that after you take back your queen's protected from his queen that may want to exchange against your queen. So let's play this out. Check, captures, captures. He's still down a whole knight, and you're profiting a piece out of it.
yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't visualize that. I cut my calculation short, like you said. I literally just saw, okay, I can't take that because he jumps out of check and I lose my queen, and that's it. That's literally as
hmm
far as my calculation went. So again, I'm cutting it short. I'm not calculating properly.
So that's exactly the issue in this game. In terms, if I was to categorize where did you struggle in this game, there were two key instances where you cut your calculation just by a move short. That kind of was the major point in which the game could have it could have sprung in a different direction just because of how critical that moment was. Yes, strongly. with the impression that after queen takes pawn, the factor of the matter is he just lost a pawn right there. The probable way I think he should have played it was to move the knight around to try to get to the c5 square. It's a bit of a long-term plan, but it seems promising enough to engage uh, this situation with, because you do have this hole on c5, and you do have this pawn weakness, and he does have this open file and the c4 break. He can club these thoughts and properly execute it in a more meaningful way. So shortly after missing out on this idea and castling, he checked. The last thing I'm gonna say about this game is, if I was in such a situation like this, I would have kind of gone into desperado mode, and I would have played rook takes knight, take, 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 and I would be happy if I can hold off for a draw over here. Just because the knight on d6 is a monster, and with that knight out of the way, I do have a very strong knight. I do have one extra pawn that I captured on d6, and even though he can still play c4, there might not be enough punch to that plan because he still has dependency on all major pieces to somehow get more activity from the follow-up. He doesn't have a minor piece to do anything more specific like he would have had with his knight resting on d6.
You might be able to
So I
grab
think
that
after
pawn. Might be able to grab that pawn easy enough as well and actually just restore the material balance.
could
But
be absolutely this pawn, it's a bit of a weakness there.
I'll,
So
I'll be
chances.
honest, I didn't realise how bad things were at this point. If I knew what I
Mhm,
knew now, I would have done that. But at the time, even though he got his knight to d6, I didn't
mhm.
quite realise how bad my position was until like the next couple of moves.
Yeah, since you chose not to take the knight, it sort of reflected that it was more of a strength that he's in this situation than your opportunity to imbalance it, because he got the c4 break while
Yeah.
his knight is on
It was
d6.
once he played
And
c4 I realised how bad it was. And I knew the thing is, I knew when he moved his
mhm,
king over, I knew he was going to play c4, but I didn't really
mhm,
evaluate it to be all that bad until he actually played it. And then I was like, yeah, I probably should have tried to do something about that. And
mhm.
I didn't really know what I even could do about it. And then it was at that point I started to realise that okay, this is pretty bad.
Yeah, it is tough now. Admittedly, it's quite close to impossible to do anything to imbalance this now, because even rook takes knight is no longer good since he's got the rook and pawn both anchored to it. And if you take, you're just helping him get an even stronger endgame position, which is why I wanted you to. Right now, if you took the knight, it would have made a bit of a difference because c4
Yeah.
would have not been as strong. Let's hypothetically say he played c4, take, take. It's not so easy for him because after you defend, well, this pawn is defended. If you just sort of maybe just continue on with the pawn break, capture, capture, it's not entirely obvious how does he infiltrate against it. Even if he puts pressure on the pawn, you have simple defenses like king c7, and he's in a bit of a struggle with that. Um, but as you can probably now sense the differences with not having taken the knight and then coming to this point, it's too late to do that because of how things changed up. He got two passed pawns. That's just gonna squeeze right in, or probably just get mated.
Yeah, I when I
Yeah.
took this, I know like I know when I took this, I'd already like in my head I'd already resigned. Like I took this, um, I took this,
Just like a last
yeah,
moment of desperation, I
yeah.
guess.
He and then I was just messing around. Like I took this, and then he brought his queen over here, and I actually picked my queen up from here and captured
Hmm.
his queen, just messing
Ah,
around.
yeah.
And he didn't actually find it very funny to be honest. But I just said, I'm joking. I resign. Yeah, I knew it was over before I even sacked. So I was just playing around really.
Yeah, I guess he was one of those very studious and serious chess players who was determined for a win no matter what.
He
And
he probably thought I was just trying to pull a fast one to be honest. But no, I was only joking around.
I'm sure he was just joking around. But um, I'm not surprised why he probably reacted that way, given that some people may have actually tried to pull a fast one like that in
Maybe, yeah.
situations like this. Yeah. But anyways, I think you definitely missed some positive opportunities in this game, owing to the tactic on f2, the free pawn on e5. I think both of them had the same logical flaw in your thought process, which was a move shot in your calculation when assessing what the move needs to be uh, in the tactic that existed there. Um, I'm okay with the choice of opening, even though I prefer the classical line. I think that's more of a personal choice than a specific way to play the position better. But I do think that it's worth playing the classical line to see if you find a more meaningful difference in your Caro-Kann play as black.
Yeah, nice.
So so th- yeah.
I'm happy with that. Yeah, like I say, I'll start playing the main line. I'll work on my
Hmm.
calculation, trying to just push it, even just trying to push it just one move deeper than where I naturally want to stop. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, and obviously I won't go pawn storming when the center's open. So yeah, there's a few valuable takeaways from that for sure.
Absolutely. Uh, with that, I think we're all set to take a quick look at the next game that you have, which was also a Caro-Kann, which is, I guess you've loaded it in Classroom already.
Yeah, let's
So
take a
I'm
look at
gonna
game number
Wing versus
3.
you. I see. I think you might need to just select the game since I don't seem to be able to do that.
Okay, 2 seconds.